My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 62, a retired nurse from Columbus, Ohio. I raised my son Ryan on my own. Every bill, every scraped knee, every late-night fever. Just me. And yet, on the night of his wedding, the son I sacrificed everything for, I learned what it really means to be erased. Before I dive in, if you've ever been pushed aside by the people you love most, hit subscribe, share this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your stories matter, maybe more than you think. The first sign came when the maitre d' led me through the glowing reception hall. Crystal chandeliers glittered above rows of gold chairs and tables covered in white linen. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, the air sweet with roses. I expected to be guided toward the family table, near my son, near the spotlight. Instead, he stopped at the far corner, right by the swinging kitchen doors. There, against a wall scuffed with shoe marks, sat a tiny cocktail table, barely big enough for one. A single folding chair waited for me, pressed against a cart stacked with dirty trays. Every time the door swung open, steam and the scent of garlic burst out, and every guest on their way to the bathroom or bar could see me stranded there. My stomach tightened. "There must be a mistake," I whispered. The maitre d' glanced down at his clipboard, avoiding my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. This is what was arranged." He gave a half smile, the kind you give when you know something's wrong, but you're paid not to fix it. I lowered myself onto the chair, the metal legs wobbling beneath me. My chiffon dress wrinkled against the edge of the table, and I folded my hands in my lap to hide the tremor. When the band quieted and the MC lifted the microphone, I leaned forward, desperate to hear my son's name. "Tonight, we honor the people who made this beautiful evening possible," he announced, voice booming. "Let's give a round of applause to Mr. and Mrs. Miller for their endless generosity and sacrifices for Vanessa and Ryan." The crowd erupted. Guests rose, clapping for Susan and Thomas Miller, Vanessa's parents, who stood beaming, bathed in golden light. Not one word about me, not a glance. I felt dozens of eyes dart toward my lonely table by the kitchen. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed for me. Others whispered behind their hands. I forced a smile, nodding as if I agreed with the charade. Through the noise, I searched for Ryan's face. My boy, my only child. He stood tall beside Vanessa, her arm looped proudly through his. When his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, I prayed for a flicker of recognition, of guilt. Instead, he smiled and turned back to Vanessa, laughing at something her father whispered. The humiliation wasn't silent anymore. It was public, sharp, undeniable. Every guest could see the mother of the groom reduced to a shadow. A woman in a red dress passed me on her way to the restroom. She hesitated, gave me a pitying look, then murmured, "I'm so sorry." I wanted to say something back, but my throat closed up. I reached for the napkin on my lap, pressing it to my lips to hide the sting of tears. The kitchen door banged open, a waiter wheeling past with a tray of champagne flutes. His eyes flicked to me, awkward, apologetic, before he pushed through into the glittering hall. I sat perfectly still, pretending the heat in my eyes was just from the ovens behind me, not the betrayal burning inside my chest. That was the moment I realized this wasn't an oversight. It wasn't clumsy planning or bad luck. This was deliberate, and everyone in that room had just witnessed my exile. The applause was still echoing when I leaned back in my flimsy chair, trying to steady my breath. My palms pressed flat against my chiffon skirt, as if smoothing the fabric could iron out the sting inside me. Across the hall, Ryan stood tall, his tuxedo crisp, his smile bright. Susan Miller leaned in to kiss his cheek, her pearl bracelet catching the light like a spotlight on her claim. Thomas clapped him on the back with the confidence of a man who believed this was his son, too. I stared. That was my place. It wasn't jealousy. It was disorientation. For a moment, I felt like I had slipped into the wrong life, the wrong wedding. I was watching my son beam like a stranger, wrapped in a family that had met him only 5 years ago, while the woman who raised him sat pressed against a cart of dirty dishes. I whispered under my breath, "I was there, Ryan. It was me." But my words dissolved into the clamor of music swelling again. My mind betrayed me, tugging me backward through years I had fought to survive. I remembered the night he was 7 and woke screaming from a night terror, sweat slick on his forehead. I sat with him until dawn, whispering stories about rockets and oceans until his breathing slowed. I remembered the braces he needed at 12, how I picked up double shifts in the ER, shuffling from trauma to trauma with blistered feet, just so he could have a straight smile. I had no savings, no vacations. My rent late more times than I want to admit. But when he finally smiled without covering his mouth, it felt worth it. And now, watching Susan Miller press her lips to his cheek like she had earned it, I felt my chest tighten so hard I thought I might choke. A young woman in emerald silk, one of Vanessa's cousins, I think, slid past my table toward the dance floor. She gave me a polite smile, then leaned toward another guest and whispered, too loud to be private, "Why is his mom sitting back there? Isn't that odd?" The words stung worse than the clapping had. It wasn't just me who noticed. Everyone could see the exile. Everyone knew. The kitchen door banged open again, and Ryan's laughter carried through. That deep, rumbling laugh I used to know when he was a boy, splashing in our backyard sprinkler. I hadn't heard it directed at me in years. Now, it belonged to them. I gripped the strap of my beige leather handbag, the one he gave me on Mother's Day when he was 12, back when he still called me Mama. My fingers trembled against the worn leather. I wanted to stand, to march across the floor and remind them all. To tell Susan that she wasn't the one who pawned her wedding ring to buy school supplies. To tell Thomas that he hadn't been there the night I drove Ryan through a snowstorm just so he wouldn't miss a chess tournament. But I stayed seated. My body felt bolted to that chair. I told myself, don't ruin this for him. Don't be that mother. And yet, when Ryan glanced my way again, his eyes slid right past me, like I was a waiter clearing plates, not the woman who carried his whole life on her back. The music swelled. Guests rose to toast, and I sat there invisible, hearing my own pulse louder than the violin strings. That was the second wound, sharper than the first. Not just being humiliated, but watching my son, my whole world, choose their embrace over mine. And I knew, with a clarity that cut like glass, that this wasn't just oversight. It was permission. He let them replace me. I kept my smile frozen as the next toast began, though my insides churned like sour milk. I was still staring at Ryan's back when a group of bridesmaids, tipsy on champagne, tumbled past me toward the bathrooms. Their laughter spilled over me like acid. One of them, Vanessa's cousin, a girl barely older than Ryan when I was working double shifts, pulled out her phone and snapped a selfie. The screen's glow caught my eye. On it, Vanessa's Instagram story pulsed, fresh and smug. His mom's card covers everything, go big or go home, wedding vibes. I blinked, thinking I'd misread it, but then another bridesmaid leaned over her shoulder, giggling. Vanessa really said that? Damn, she's bold. The cousin whispered back, not low enough. Ryan's cool with it. He said she deserves it. Can you believe they scored the honeymoon suite with her card? My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might retch right there on the sticky tile floor. I pulled my own phone from my handbag, Ryan's Mother's Day gift, beige leather edges worn from years of use, and opened my banking app. Transaction after transaction scrolled down the screen. Not just the spa package I'd reluctantly approved, not just floral upgrades. No. 4,200, Prada, Chicago, 6,800, first-class tickets, Delta Airlines, Honolulu, $3,500. Diamond tennis bracelet, Saks, Fifth Avenue. My throat closed. They hadn't just dipped into my card. They had drained it. "Excuse me," I muttered, standing so abruptly my chair screeched against the floor. A waiter paused, balancing a tray of martinis. "Everything all right, ma'am?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Fine, just checking something." But inside, I was shaking. The music, the clinking glasses, the laughter, it all blurred into a low roar. I stepped back against the wall, pressing my phone to my chest like it might anchor me. I couldn't stop myself. I tapped open Venmo. There it was. A public note Vanessa had sent to one of her bridesmaids. "Brunch on Evelyn, she won't even notice. She's covering it all anyway." The words glowed like neon, humiliating and final. They weren't just stealing from me. They were laughing while they did it. I gasped, a small sound lost beneath the band's saxophone riff. And then, God help me, I caught Ryan's profile across the room. He was nodding along as Vanessa whispered something into his ear. He chuckled, slipping his arm tighter around her waist. He knew. My knees nearly buckled. It wasn't only her scheme, it was their scheme. My son, the boy I once carried through hospital corridors, the man who stood tall in that tuxedo, was complicit. I wanted to storm across the floor and scream, "How dare you!" I wanted to grab Vanessa's perfect bouquet and tear it apart petal by petal. Instead, I lowered back onto my shaky chair, phone still glowing in my lap. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped it. I whispered to myself, "It's not just money, it's me. They're spending me." Another guest passed, staring openly now at my little exile table. I didn't even bother to smile back. Because at that moment, humiliation had sharpened into something else. Something harder, colder. Rage. And with it came the seed of an idea. I sat frozen in that rickety chair, phone still burning in my lap, when the microphone squealed and silenced the crowd. My breath caught. I knew that voice. It was my son. Ryan stepped up to the podium, straightening his tux jacket, his face lit like he belonged under those chandeliers. The room hushed, waiting for the groom's words. I leaned forward, foolish hope rising in my chest like a last prayer. Maybe, just maybe, he would see me. "Tonight," he began, voice smooth, rehearsed. "I want to thank everyone who made this day possible." He glanced toward the Miller table, where Vanessa's parents clasped each other's hands, beaming. "To Susan and Thomas, your endless support, your generosity. None of this would be possible without you." Applause thundered, glasses raised high. My fingernails dug into my palm. "Without them?" Ryan's voice grew warmer, steadier. "Vanessa, you've given me a new family, one that's welcomed me with open arms. I'm so lucky to be your son-in-law." The words hit me like a slap. I waited, heart hammering, for my name, for any acknowledgement. But his eyes swept across the room, not once toward the corner where I sat. Not once. A sharp laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The woman at the next table turned, eyebrows knitting, but I didn't care. My chest ached, tight with something far heavier than humiliation. It wasn't only that he had thanked them. It was that he had rewritten the story entirely. My story, my sacrifices, handing it to strangers as if I had never existed. I mouthed the words silently. "I raised you, Ryan. Not them. Me." The mic crackled again. Ryan lifted his glass high. "And to my beautiful wife, Vanessa, thank you for making my dreams come true. You've given me everything I've ever wanted." Vanessa kissed his cheek. Her eyes flicked sideways, toward me, and then she smiled. Not guilty, not nervous, smug. Like she knew exactly where I was, like she'd put me here herself. Something inside me splintered. I stood, pushing my chair back so hard it scraped against the wall. Heads turned. A waiter stumbled past, muttering an apology, but I barely noticed. My legs moved of their own accord, carrying me a few steps closer to the glowing hall. I stopped just short of the threshold, peeking through the crack of the swinging door. Ryan was laughing again, that same deep laugh from his childhood, only now it belonged to them. To her. To the family who had claimed him without earning a single scar. My throat burned. My eyes blurred. I pressed a napkin to my mouth to hide the tremor, to keep from collapsing. In that moment, the truth landed like a stone dropped into still water. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't oversight. It was choice. My son had chosen them. And the woman I had become, exhausted, invisible, disposable, wasn't his family anymore. The band struck up again, the dance floor filling with guests clapping and spinning beneath the chandeliers. I stood there, half hidden in the shadows, my chest heaving. Every memory of scraped knees, double shifts, bedtime stories, it all pressed against me, demanding recognition that would never come. And as Ryan twirled Vanessa beneath the golden lights, smiling like a stranger, I felt the last fragile thread between us snap. That was my breaking point. I wasn't just humiliated, I was erased. And in the silence that roared louder than the music, I knew something had to change. I stood frozen at the edge of the hall, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the band's trumpet. The laughter, the applause, the golden glow, it all blurred. One thought blazed through me. They erased me, and I let them. No more. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. My fingers shook, but my voice didn't when I pressed the florist's number. "This is Evelyn Carter," I said, low but steady. "Cancel tomorrow's brunch order. No delivery, no payment." The manager stammered. "But ma'am, we're already—" "Cancel," I cut him off. My thumb ended the call before he could finish. Next, the band's agent. The saxophone still swelled behind me as I whispered, "Stop after this set. You won't be paid another dime." He hesitated. "We're halfway through." "Then enjoy the first half." Click. Finally, the bar manager. "Shut it down," I told him. "The tab is closed." For a moment, I almost laughed. My voice was calm, surgical. Years of nursing had taught me how to sound composed, even when blood poured out of someone's chest. Tonight, it wasn't blood. It was money, respect, my very existence. The change rippled almost instantly. The song ended, but the band didn't start another. Bartenders poured the last round, then crossed their arms behind the counter. A man near the front called out, "Hey, what's going on?" Murmurs spread like wildfire. I pushed through the swinging door and stepped into the golden light. The music had died, but the whispers were louder. Vanessa stiffened when she saw me. Her smile faltered, the smug curve of her lips trembling for the first time that night. Ryan's brow furrowed. "Mom, what are you doing?" I didn't answer him. Not yet. I walked straight to the DJ table and plucked the microphone from its stand. Feedback squealed. Heads turned. My voice shook once, then steadied. "I'm Evelyn Carter, the groom's mother. The woman who paid for every flower, every chair, every glass of champagne you've been enjoying tonight." Gasps. A hush fell. I saw Susan Miller's face drain of color, Thomas shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I was told my place tonight was by the kitchen doors," I continued, my voice hardening. "I was told I didn't fit the theme. But let me tell you something." I lifted my chin. "Without me, there is no theme. Without me, there is no wedding." A ripple of shock ran through the guests. Someone whispered, "She's right." I turned my eyes to Ryan. My son, my only child. His face was pale now, his mouth half open, searching for words. "I worked 30 years as a nurse," I said, voice catching. "So this man could have braces, so he could go to college. I gave up vacations, sleep, a life of my own. And tonight, I was treated like a stranger." Ryan stepped forward, hand out. "Mom, stop. You're making a scene." I pulled the mic closer. "Yes, I am, because silence is what got me shoved into the shadows, and I'm done being silent." The crowd erupted, some gasping, some clapping, some whispering fiercely into their wine glasses. I let the silence stretch. Then I set the microphone down on the table with finality. "Enjoy what's left," I said. "It won't last long." And I walked out. The heavy doors shut behind me, muffling the chaos that exploded inside, the confused voices, the sputtering arguments, the sound of something breaking. I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt taller, lighter, alive. The ballroom behind me was erupting. Questions, complaints, confusion. I had walked out once, but something in me stopped at the doorway. For years, I had swallowed my words, telling myself silence was dignity. But silence was how they erased me. Not tonight. I pushed the door back open. The chatter stumbled into hush as heads turned. Susan Miller's pearls glinted under the chandelier as she whispered furiously to her husband. Vanessa gripped Ryan's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. My son's eyes widened, a flicker of fear or shame crossing his face. I didn't slow. I walked back to the stage, the click of my heels echoing sharp against the marble floor. The microphone still sat where I'd left it, abandoned in the scramble. I picked it up again. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "I am not here to ruin anyone's fairy tale. I am here to end mine." The room froze. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, trays balanced mid-air. "I am Evelyn Carter, Ryan's mother. For 33 years, I have carried the weight of every bill, every scraped knee, every hospital stay. I worked nights in the ER so he could wear braces, so he could walk into college debt-free, so he could build the life you're all celebrating tonight." A murmur rippled. Some heads nodded, others glanced nervously at the Millers. And what did I receive in return? My throat tightened, but I held my voice steady. A seat by the kitchen doors. A bill with my name on it, and theirs written in the credits. Vanessa's face flushed red. She whispered something to Ryan, but I raised a hand before he could speak. "No, Ryan, you've said enough tonight. You thanked the people who met you as an adult, while the woman who raised you was shoved into the shadows? And you let it happen." His lips parted, but no words came. I turned to the crowd. "So listen closely. Every flower here, every bottle at that bar, every note from the band. You enjoyed it because of me. Not Susan, not Thomas, me. And as of tonight, that support is finished." Gasps, a few claps, hesitant, then firmer. Someone whispered, "Good for her." I took a deep breath, letting the weight of my words settle. This is not bitterness. This is not pettiness. This is clarity. I have been erased from my own son's story, and I refuse to fund the sequel. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You can't just—" "Yes," I said, turning the mic toward her. "I can, because without me, there is no open bar, no brunch tomorrow, no fairy tale honeymoon funded on a card that isn't yours. Without me, there's just the truth, that I was good enough to pay, but never good enough to be seen." The silence after that was heavy, electric. I felt it land, every word, like stones dropped in a pond. I set the microphone back down, steady this time. My hands no longer shook. Looking at Ryan one last time, I said quietly, only for him, but loud enough that the mic carried it. "I gave you everything. Tonight you gave me nothing. We're even now." And with that, I turned, walking toward the doors as the room erupted, half in stunned applause, half in awkward murmurs. I didn't care which side they fell on. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for approval. I had declared myself out loud for everyone to hear. And there was no taking it back. The hotel room smelled faintly of roses and grease from the reception that still clung to my hair. I shut the door behind me, leaned against it, and exhaled for the first time all night. The echoes of gasps and whispers from the ballroom still rang in my ears. I didn't bother undressing. I lay down on the stiff white comforter, still in my mauve dress, staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow, hypnotic circles. My body begged for sleep, but my mind raced, replaying every second of that night. The applause for Susan and Thomas, Ryan's toast, Vanessa's smug smile. I rolled onto my side, grabbed my phone from the nightstand. It buzzed with missed calls. Ryan, Vanessa, even my niece. What happened? Everyone's freaking out. I silenced it. Let them freak out. But I couldn't stop myself from opening the banking app again. The numbers blurred at first. Then they sharpened, cruel and undeniable. The Prada charges I'd seen earlier were only the beginning. 12,600, 4 seasons Maui, honeymoon package, 7,200, private yacht rental, Honolulu Harbor, 2,900, diamond earrings, Cartier. I sat up, clutching the phone, my chest tightening. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had planned their future on my dime. A notification blinked. A new Venmo note from Vanessa to one of her bridesmaids. Spa day on Evelyn she'll never notice. Wedding queen. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I pressed my knuckles against my mouth, holding back the scream clawing at my throat. I couldn't stay in that room. I needed air. I slipped on my shoes and drove home through the quiet Ohio night, headlights cutting across empty highways. By the time I pulled into my driveway, dawn was still hours away. Inside, the house was silent, heavy with years of sacrifices embedded in its walls. I went straight to the dresser in my bedroom, yanking open drawers, searching almost without knowing what for. Receipts, old pay stubs, medical bills from when Ryan was a boy. All the evidence of my life poured out around me. At the very bottom of a file folder, yellowed at the edges, I found it. An envelope, sealed, addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade. Michael, my late husband. My breath caught. I remembered the weeks after his death, when I'd found this letter tucked into a stack of papers, but couldn't bring myself to open it. The grief had been too raw then. Tonight, grief was the least of my burdens. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the thin paper. Evelyn, it began, the slant of his handwriting familiar and haunting. I know you never wanted to hear from me again, but I can't leave this world with the weight of this secret. Ryan, he isn't yours. Not biologically. I found out years ago. Vanessa's mother was pregnant when we got together. I thought I could pretend, but I can't take it to the grave without telling you. I'm sorry. The words blurred. For a moment the room spun, then steadied. I reread the lines again and again until the truth carved itself into me. Ryan wasn't mine, not by blood. The weight of 33 years pressed down on my chest. Every night shift, every scraped knee, every birthday cake baked from scratch when I barely had rent money. I had poured my soul into a child who wasn't even mine to begin with. And now, that child had stood beside another family, smiling as though I never existed. I didn't cry. Not this time. The tears had dried years ago, back when I thought abandonment by Michael was the worst betrayal I'd ever know. Tonight, I learned worse. I sat at the kitchen table as the sky outside paled to blue, the letter trembling in my hands. For 33 years, I had been mother, provider, protector. Now, I wasn't sure who I was. But one thing was certain. Everything had changed. The letter still trembled in my hands as the first light of morning bled through the curtains. My eyes were dry, my chest hollow, but inside me, something dangerous was stirring, something sharp, alive. I stood slowly, folding the paper with deliberate care, as if by controlling my hands, I could control the storm inside. I placed it on the kitchen table, beside the chipped coffee mug I'd used for decades. For the first time, I didn't feel like hiding it away. Let the truth sit in the open. My reflection caught me in the hallway mirror. My hair, pinned and sprayed for Ryan's wedding, drooped in uneven curls. Mascara smudged in faint shadows under my eyes, the face of a woman who had aged 10 years in one night. I stared, and then I whispered to myself, "No more." I walked to the bathroom, opened the drawer, and pulled out the old pair of scissors I used to trim Ryan's school projects. My hand hovered for only a second before I raised the blades to my hair. The first cut was jagged, uneven, but the sound of it, snip, was liberating. Strands of mauve-tinted brown tumbled into the sink. I cut again and again until my shoulders were bare and light. Each lock that fell was another burden dropped. The braces, the rent, the double shifts, the wedding bills. By the time I stopped, my reflection was unfamiliar. My hair was short, messy, but my eyes looked alive, fierce. The house was still quiet, but I felt the silence shift, no longer suffocating, but waiting, like it knew something had changed. I went to the living room, pulled the heavy photo albums from the shelf. Page after page of Ryan's childhood smiled back at me. Birthday cakes, soccer games, prom night. I traced the images with trembling fingers, remembering every sacrifice behind every smile. And then I stood, carried the album to the fireplace, and lit a match. The flame licked the corner of a photo. Ryan at 10, chocolate cake smeared across his cheeks, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. I watched the image curl and blacken, smoke spiraling upward like a release of all the years I had held on too tightly. One by one, I fed the photos to the fire, not out of hate, out of release, out of the need to stop worshiping at the altar of a motherhood that had consumed me. When the last page turned to ash, I sank onto the rug, cross-legged, watching the embers fade. My hands no longer shook. My breath came slow and steady. For the first time, I wasn't mourning, I wasn't begging. I was free. Later, I showered, rinsing the smoke and the scent of roses from my hair, scrubbing until the wedding perfume slid down the drain. I dressed simply, jeans, a cotton shirt. When I looked in the mirror again, I didn't see a discarded mother. I saw a woman, Evelyn Carter, 62, alive. The sun was rising fully now, flooding the kitchen in gold. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, poured it black, and sat at the table where the letter still lay. The words hadn't changed, but I had. I rested my hand over the paper and whispered, "You didn't break me, Michael. You freed me." For decades I had lived for someone else, for a boy who wasn't mine, for a man who abandoned me, for a family who replaced me. Now finally I would live for me. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly in the corners of my house, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt cleansing. After burning away the past, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. That morning, I picked up my phone, not to scroll aimlessly or to wait for Ryan's call that never came, but to dial numbers I hadn't used in ages. "Linda, hi, it's Evelyn." "Yes, it's been too long. Listen, I was wondering, how about dinner at my place Friday night? No, not just you. Invite your husband. Bring whoever you want. I'm hosting." Her surprised laugh trickled through the speaker. "You? Hosting? Evelyn, I'd love that." One by one, I called neighbors, old colleagues, even the young barista from the cafe down the street who always remembered my order. My voice trembled at first, but by the fifth call, excitement replaced nerves. For years, My home had been a place of silence, filled only with Ryan's occasional visits and my quiet routines. Now, it would echo with voices again. Voices that chose to be there, not out of obligation, but out of connection. By Friday evening, I stood in my freshly cleaned living room, short hair styled simply, wearing a dress I hadn't touched in years. It wasn't expensive or glamorous, but it was mine. I set out platters of roasted chicken, pasta, and a pie cooling on the counter. As the first knock sounded, my heart raced like I was a girl again. "Evelyn, you look amazing!" Linda exclaimed as she stepped in with a bottle of wine. Behind her came neighbors carrying flowers, laughter spilling into my hallway. I smiled, genuinely, maybe for the first time in decades. "Come in. Tonight's about new beginnings." Soon, the house buzzed with life. People clinking glasses, music humming softly in the background, chairs pulled close. I moved among them, laughing at jokes, listening to stories, filling plates. At one point, I caught myself in the mirror again. The woman I saw wasn't broken or abandoned. She was vibrant, hosting her own rebirth. Midway through the night, I tapped my glass. The chatter faded, eyes turning toward me. For a moment, nerves threatened to choke my words. Then, I took a deep breath. "I want to thank you all for being here. Some of you know bits of my story, some of you don't. But here's the truth. I've spent most of my life giving everything I had to people who didn't value it. And for too long, I believed their rejection defined me." My throat tightened, but I pressed on, voice steadying. But tonight, looking at all of you, I realize family isn't just blood. Family is who shows up, who cares, who chooses you. A silence hung for a beat. Then the room erupted in applause, clinking glasses, warm smiles. Linda squeezed my hand, whispering, "About time you said it out loud." Later, as candles burned low and the last guests lingered, I stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, stars scattered across the sky. For once, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own life. Behind me, laughter still echoed from the living room. Real, chosen family. I closed my eyes and whispered to the night, "This is my beginning," and I meant it. The echoes of laughter from my rebirth party still lingered in my mind as I walked into the cafe a week later. The same cafe where I'd once hidden in the corner, praying no one would notice me. Now, I chose the table by the window, sunlight spilling across my hands. I was no longer hiding. That's when I saw them, Ryan and Vanessa, standing awkwardly near the entrance. Their eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. For a moment, they hesitated, as if realizing the balance of power had shifted. I didn't rush to greet them. Instead, I lifted my cup of coffee, calm and deliberate, forcing them to walk toward me. "Evelyn," Ryan began, his voice carrying that old mix of charm and authority. "Thanks for meeting us." Vanessa slid into the seat across from me without waiting for an invitation. Her expensive perfume filled the air, suffocating, like always. "We need to talk," she said briskly, adjusting her designer bag on the chair. I arched an eyebrow. "Do we?" Ryan cleared his throat. "Look, things haven't been easy. The business deal collapsed. We're struggling. And Mom..." He caught himself. "Evelyn, you've always been the strong one. We thought maybe you could help us out." The audacity nearly made me laugh. For months, they'd treated me like a burden, a relic to be discarded. And now, when their empire crumbled, they came crawling back. I set my cup down carefully. "Help you out? You mean the way you helped me out when you threw me into the street? Or the way you supported me when you drained the savings I'd worked a lifetime to build?" Vanessa's smile tightened. "We did what was best for everyone at the time. You can't keep living in the past." "Funny," I said, leaning forward, "because you're the ones dragging the past to my table right now." The tension grew thick, silence stretching between us. I let it linger until Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "You don't understand," he insisted. "We're family. Family sticks together." That word, family, hit me like a cold slap. For years, I'd begged for that bond, starved for it, sacrificed for it. But now, I finally understood. Family wasn't the people who shared my blood. It was the people who showed up when the storm hit. I straightened, my voice clear. "No, Ryan, family doesn't steal from you. Family doesn't toss you aside because you're inconvenient. And family certainly doesn't come crawling back only when they're desperate." Vanessa scoffed, her tone sharp. "So you're just going to turn your back on us after everything we gave you?" I couldn't help it. I laughed, loud enough that heads turned from nearby tables. "What you gave me? You gave me scars, betrayal, and silence. But you know what? You also gave me freedom. Because once you cut me off, I learned to live without your approval, and I'll never give that power back." Ryan's shoulders slumped. Vanessa muttered something under her breath, but I didn't bother to catch it. I gathered my bag, stood up, and smoothed my dress. "I don't owe you anything," I said, meeting Ryan's eyes for the last time. "Not my money, not my forgiveness, not another ounce of my life. I've already given enough." I pushed my chair in, calm but firm. "Enjoy your coffee. It'll be the last thing you get from me." And with that, I walked out into the sunlight. The air outside was crisp, alive, filled with possibility. Behind me, I could still hear their voices, angry, pleading, desperate, but they no longer had the power to pull me back. For the first time, I didn't feel like the abandoned one. I was the one walking away, head held high. When I stepped out of that cafe, leaving Ryan and Vanessa behind with their hollow pleas, I thought the chapter was closed. But the universe had other plans. That night, lying in bed, I replayed their words in my head. "We're family. Family sticks together." The hypocrisy burned. For years, I had swallowed my pain in silence, too ashamed to admit that the people closest to me had betrayed me. But silence only protected them, not me. So, I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as my heart pounded. This time, I wasn't going to hide. I started typing, every detail, every scar, every stolen dollar, and cruel dismissal. I wrote about the night they threw me out, the empty fridge, the bank account drained in my name, and how I had clawed my way back. My words poured out like a confession, raw and unfiltered. By 3 a.m., I hit post. I didn't expect what came next. By morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, notifications, friend requests. My story had exploded. People were sharing it across platforms, tagging it with words like family betrayal, revenge story, stand strong. A text from Julia, my friend who'd stood by me, flashed on the screen. "Evelyn, you're everywhere, TikTok, Facebook, even the local news page. People are calling you inspiring." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stream of comments. Strangers from across the world wrote things like, "This is my story too. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. You're living proof that walking away is sometimes the bravest choice. Family isn't blood, it's loyalty." For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. My pain wasn't hidden in dusty corners of my memory. It was out in the open, and people weren't judging me. They were standing with me. Of course, not everyone celebrated. Ryan called, furious. His voice cracked through the voicemail. "How could you air our private business like that? You've ruined us." Vanessa's email wasn't any kinder. "Delete it now. You're humiliating the family. You'll regret this." But their threats didn't scare me anymore. The truth was out, and the truth had power. I recorded a short video, my hands steady, my voice stronger than ever. This isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming my voice. Too many of us suffer in silence when family betrays us. If my story helps even one person walk away from toxic loyalty, it's worth it. I posted it, and within hours it hit 1 million views. That evening, Julia and I sat on my balcony, wine glasses in hand, watching the sunset. She nudged me playfully. "Do you realize what you've done? You've gone viral, Evelyn. You're a symbol now." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "A symbol of what? Survival?" "Of strength," she said firmly. "Of freedom. People see themselves in you." I looked at the glowing horizon, a weight lifting from my chest. For years, my story had been twisted, hidden, erased. But now it was mine again, loud, undeniable, and shared with the world. I whispered more to myself than to Julia. They tried to bury me in silence. Instead, they planted a voice. The days after my post went viral felt surreal. My inbox overflowed with interview requests, messages from strangers thanking me for speaking up, and invitations to share my story on podcasts and community panels. For once, I wasn't just surviving, I was being heard. One evening, I stood by the window of my apartment, the city lights flickering below. Julia dropped by with takeout, and as we ate, she grinned. "Evelyn, do you realize you turned your deepest wound into a movement? That takes courage most people can't even imagine." Her words settled over me like a blanket. I wasn't just the woman who had been thrown out and betrayed. I had become something else, a reminder that even broken pieces could be reassembled into something stronger. Ryan and Vanessa had gone silent. After my video reached national attention, their outrage turned into shame. I heard whispers that Ryan lost his managerial position at work. Vanessa's reputation in her social circle had crumbled. But strangely, I didn't feel joy in their downfall. My victory wasn't about watching them fall. It was about proving I could rise. Weeks later, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment. Julia, a few supportive colleagues, and some new friends I'd met through my online community filled the room with laughter. There was no tension, no sharp words, no judgment, just warmth. I looked around and realized this was family too, not by blood, but by choice. As the night wound down, I raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said softly. Everyone clinked their glasses with mine, smiling. For the first time in years, I didn't feel hollow. I felt free. If you've stayed with me until now, maybe you see yourself in parts of my story. Maybe you've been dismissed, betrayed, or made to believe you're worth less than you are. I want you to hear me clearly. You are not defined by the people who broke you. You are defined by how you choose to rebuild. What I learned is this: family isn't always the people who share your last name. Sometimes it's the ones who show up, who listen, who hold your hand when life shatters. Walking away from toxic ties doesn't make you heartless. It makes you brave. I wasted years trying to earn love that was never meant to be given. Now, I pour that love into myself and into those who genuinely care. And you can too. If my story has touched you, I ask one thing. Don't stay silent about your own truth. Speak it, live it, own it. Because when you reclaim your voice, you reclaim your life. If this resonated with you, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video so others might find strength in it too. And tell me in the comments, what part of your story are you ready to take back?